Morning everyone, and thanks for joining us. Today we're going to have a look at the SACS Education and Information Workshops. Today's program is a government funded program and is proudly brought to you by National Disability Services, Australian Council of Social Services, Jobs Australia and the Australian Services Union. So today we're going to have a look at transitioning across from your old Queensland Awards to the modern SACS Award, and specifically the timetable for transitioning those loadings and penalties. We're also going to have a look at other conditions of the modern award, and we're also going to look at the changes to come out of the November award review. Also, we'll have a look at the April review and what's pending to be known shortly. We're also going to have a look at implementation issues for your organisation. We'll also be talking about the equal remuneration order and specifically how the implementation impacts with the Queensland regulation and the TPEOs in Queensland. And then lastly, we'll look at industrial obligations and funding for your organisation. So in terms of transitioning across from your old awards, classifications had to have been translated over from July 2012. So you had to have moved away from the old SACS or the QCSCA classifications to the modern SCADS award classifications as of July last year. And thankfully, the old Queensland awards were based on 8 classifications, as is the modern award. In terms of pay rates, including the equal remuneration order, subject to you being sitting on the TPEOs or the regulation, we started phasing over those award rates from July 2012, and that we'll continue to move to the modern award rates come December 2020. We'll all be on the same rates of pay. In terms of penalty rates and loadings, we commenced phasing across from July 2012, and that'll continue until, thankfully, July 2014, we'll all be sitting on the modern award provisions. In terms of allowances, these have applied since July 2010, so all the SCADS provisions have applied since then. In terms of redundancy severance payments, some previous Queensland State Awards or NAPSA provisions continue to be upheld until July 2014, where those provisions are higher. If you're in any doubt, you should definitely get that advice from your employer association. In terms of other conditions, we've been sitting fully on the modern award since July 2010. So under the move to the modern award, we started to phase across the old SACS Queensland and QCSCA awards, applied a 20% afternoon shift, and what you're seeing here is the provision under the old award. So the afternoon shift was 20% and the night shift was a 35% loading, and that was for very specific hours outlined in those old awards. However, as you can see here, the modern award applies only a 12.5% loading for an afternoon shift and a 15% loading for a night shift. So in fact, this is where we are at the moment. From July last year, we had to be applying 8%, which is the phasing down of that 20% loading, and that's reduced by the proportionate amount down to the 8%. We're also at the same time phasing in the 12.5% modern award application, and because there was no previous allowance for that, that increases to 7.5%. So currently for an afternoon shift in Queensland, depending on the hours, you'll be applying an 8% plus a 7.5% loading to the applicable hours. From July this year, that 8% will phase down to a 4%, and the modern award application will phase up from 7.5% across to 10%. So from July this year, you can see we'll be applying roughly a 14% loading, but that'll be dependent upon where the employee's hours are. From July 2014, the modern award spells out the 12.5% applies to the entire shift for a shift that finishes after 8 p.m. and before midnight, so that'll get just a 12.5% loading there. In terms of the old night shift, it was, as I said, 35%. So again, we need to phase that down for those applicable hours. So you're currently sitting on a 14% loading down from that 35%. But at the same time, we're phasing in this 15% modern award application, so that's currently being applied at 9%, certainly for the last 12 months. From July of this year, that 14% will go down to a 7% loading, and then from that modern award application will go from a 9% to a 12% application. So that'll be a 19%, that will be being applied depending on someone's hours. And then, thankfully, as we say, come July next year, we'll all be sitting on the modern award 15%. You can see public holidays was always 150% and is maintained at 150% under the modern award. Here's some change in terms of weekend. Saturday and Sunday used to be both 75% on both days. However, Saturday goes down to a 50% loading in the modern award and Sunday is at 100% loading in the modern award. So that Saturday needs to phase down towards the 50%. So at the moment you'll be applying a 60% loading instead of the 75%. And then from July this year, that loading will go down to 55%. From July next year, we'll be looking purely at the 50% loading, which is the modern award application. At the same time, you can see Sunday increases. So it's gone from a 75% loading up to a 90% loading as of July last year. From July this year, it goes to a 95%. And then from July next year, you can see we'll be sitting on, as we say, the modern award 100% application. In terms of the casual loading, you can see here, under the old SACS Queensland, it was a 23%, it was, originally a 20% loading. From July last year, that loading increased to a 23% application. Under the old QCSVA and the old disability support workers, it used to be a 23% loading. However, that increased as of July last year to 24.2%. From July this year, the SACS and Cash Queensland will go to 24%, and the QCSCA and disability support will go to 24.6%. And then again, from July next year, it'll be the modern award, 25% is what will apply. In terms of weekend loading, at the time of going to print, there is no weekend loading for casuals, so all that they do get is that casual loading on a weekend. However, we'll have a look at this in a second. This has come up as part of the April Modern Award review. But at the moment, you can see there is no weekend loading for casuals, so we would be phasing down that 75% Saturday and Sunday loading down towards the zero. So they're currently applying a 30% loading to both Saturday and Sunday from July last year. From July this year, that loading goes down to 15%, and then from July next year, it goes down to 0%. However, I need to pause for a moment. When we're talking about casuals and phasing down weekend loading and there being no loading for a casual on a weekend, that's really what we call true casuals. So those people that you bring up to fill in on an irregular and unsystematic basis. If you've got casuals rostered on a regular and systematic basis, so you've got them regularly rostered, then it's quite likely that you'll need to maintain these loadings on a weekend. But if you're in any doubt, you should definitely check that with your employer association. So in terms of the Modern Award review of November last year, it clarified that there's a 4-hour minimum engagement period either before or after a sleepover. So it means that you can work both sides of that sleepover, and as we know, sleepover must be of 8 hours duration. So someone could potentially do a 5-hour stand-up shift, an 8-hour sleepover shift, and then a 1-hour handover at the end. Or if you like, the maximum someone can do in a day is 10 hours. They could do any variation of that either side of the sleepover. But one of those periods must be a minimum of 4 hours, or you must pay that as 4 hours. The other thing that was clarified is there is a 10-hour required between shifts for someone to have a break before they can start their next shift. However, where it's in conjunction with a sleepover, that break between periods can be reduced to 8 hours, but that's where agreement with the employee. And we definitely advise you to get that in writing with the employee to reduce that 10-hour break to an 8-hour break. In terms of the Modern Award review of November as well, just because someone goes in and provides services in a private residence or in an outreach doesn't necessarily mean that they will translate into Schedule E or the home care provisions of the Modern Award. That's just because they go into a client's private home. If they're likely to be going in and just providing basic support, care, needs, cooking, showering, etc., that may well get them into the home care section. However, you really need to sit down with the Modern Award classifications, have a look at Schedule E and Schedule B. Schedule B obviously is the SACS part of the SCADs. And if they are doing the higher level care, If they're providing, taking those clients out to meet different services, etc., then it's very likely that they'll go into the SACS part, not the home care. The other thing that was clarified as of the November review is that loadings are payable for broken shifts are determined by the end of the shift, and 24-hour care provisions can only apply to home care workers. Now, coming out of the April review, so the ASU have put an application in terms of part-time employment in a similar way that the casuals have minimum engagement periods. So depending where a casual is engaged under, whether it be Schedule A, B, C or D, there's either a 3-hour, or a 2-hour or a 1-hour minimum engagement period each time that casual works. And the ASU's application seeks to import, if you like, the same minimum engagement periods for part-time employees depending on which part of the award they're classified under. The ASU also applied in April to reinsert small employer redundancies back into the award provisions, and while they are less of a redundancy entitlement than the NES, it at least does provide those employers with under 15 employees some entitlement to redundancy. Also, broken shifts, the ASU's application seeks to insert either penalty rates or some sort of loading payable for broken shifts. As we looked at, casual penalty rates, at the moment, as we said, there are no weekend loadings for casual. However, the ASU's application does seek to reinsert those casual penalty rates for a weekend. So that would mean that the casual loading and the weekend penalties apply, as not is the case at the moment, it's just the casual loading that applies. The ASU have also applied in terms of annual leave and public holidays around shift workers, and it is possible for those shift workers to miss some of those public holidays, so we're waiting to see what happens there. So in terms of implementation issues, some organisations have been talking to us about, do the rostering arrangements still make sense under SCADS? We looked at, there's been a huge shift in terms of the loadings for afternoon and night shifts, and really it's about you sitting down and working out whether the shifts that you're now applying, whereas the old loadings used to apply at certain hours, the modern award dictates that that loading applies across the entire shift depending on where that shift started and finished. So you need to have a look at it. Is it possible to make some potential savings around this, the loadings just by moving the start and finish times of those shifts? The other thing that organisations have been talking to us about is moving long-term casuals and potentially making better use of part-time employment. Certainly part-time employment affords organisations as much flexibility, but without that casual loading. There is a process for moving staff over to permanent part-time employment. It means consulting with those employees and taking them along with you about why it's good for them to move over at the same time. Obviously the organisation makes some potential savings around that casual loading, but at the same time those employees then pick up annual leave and sick leave. But it's certainly a way that you can look to reduce some costs while maintaining that flexibility for the clients as well. Another thing that's really important is job design and classification. It's certainly about looking at your position descriptions, where you've got jobs classified under the modern award, and is that necessarily going to work for your organisation going forward. Just to pause for a second, disability support workers, they do move to the SACS classification structure within the SCADS, and there are 4 levels that move into 2 or approximately 3 levels within the SCADS. And what we're looking at here is we've done a translation table for you, so it's very likely that the old DSW level 1 and 2 who are providing personal care and domestic assistance will most likely go into level 1 within the SACS part of the SCADS. Level 3 and 4, depending on the types of job that they do and the skills that are required, they may assist in development of client plans, and it's really about routine procedures. They will usually translate to about a level 2 in the SACS part of the SCADS. Again, a level 4, it is possible for a level 4 to go to a SACS level 3, and that's usually the supervisor who develops work plans, non-routine work, and is quite an experienced employee. So in terms of the equal remuneration order and the transitional pay equity orders in Queensland, Queensland in this way is quite unique. State pay equity increases from 2009 are preserved as what we call the transitional pay equity orders in the federal Fair Work system. And of course they were subject to a new regulation as of December last year, and we'll have a look at that in a second. And the ERO does apply to SACS and crisis accommodation employees unless the TPEO is higher. So if the TPEO or the regulation rates or the QCSCA rates are higher, these rates are maintained until the ERO catches up to where you are, but you don't apply both, it's one or the other. So in terms of the ERO, the modern award rates increase between 23 to 45%, and the full amount becomes payable on December 2020. And that is phased in 9 equal instalments on the 1st of December each year. And your old transitional rates are affected by the ERO, it's just they move at a slower proportional rate. So here's what the ERO looks like in its entirety. So a level 2 moves by 23%, as we said, right down to a level 8 that moves by 45%, or expresses a percentage each year. 2.6 right down to 5% is the ERO each year. So your old award rates, as we said, are maintained as what we call transitional award rates if they're higher than the modern award rate. However, if those rates were lower, you had to move to the modern award rate from the 1st of July 2012, and very unlikely in Queensland, given your rates were substantially higher than the modern award rates. And the transitional rates, it's important to note, as I said, they do increase in line with the modern award, but they increase at a slower proportionate rate. But thankfully, we all arrive at the same point come December 2020. So in terms of the ERO calculation, just to set it out for you, this is the way the actual calculation is done. A is the current equal remuneration payment, or if you think of it this way, where we'll be when the full ERO is applied in December 2020. And B is where you currently are now. So that's either going to be the modern award rate or your preserved transitional award amount. And the way to do the actual calculation is to work out where someone will be come December 2020, subtract that from where they are now, and that will give you a difference. Divide that difference by 1/9 and add the 1/9 difference to where someone currently is. Again, same calculation, where will you be in December 2020 from where you currently are, divided by the 1/9. The only difference in year 2 is to multiply it by 2 and add that back to where someone currently is. Same in year 3, the only difference is we do the same calculation divided by the 1/9, but we multiply it by 3. So I think this is a really good visual representation of what we're talking about. If this is where the full ERO will be come December 2020, you can see it's quite a large chunk. This is the current modern award rate. You can see it starts from quite a low substantial rate, and this is where we need to be come December 2020. So we calculate the difference between the two, and we divide that difference up into 9 equal chunks of the pie, if you like. This is your old preserved rate, and you can see we still need to get to the same point come December 2020. It's just that we don't have as far to go. So we calculate the difference, again dividing it by the 1/9, and the only difference you can see here is the slices of the pie, if you like, are substantially different, and that's because we don't have as far to go from the old rates. So in terms of the December 2012 regulation, it clarified that the 2 TPEOs covering Queensland, which is the QCSCA employers, and for those employers that became subject to the regulation because they were sitting on the old SACS or the cash Queensland, and it did clarify that the state wage increases for September 2010, 2011 and 2012 did apply. However, it did clarify that from 2013, the national wage increase will apply from July, so we won't see any more state wage increases. We'll only see the national minimum wage increase from 2013. It also clarified that ERO rates apply either when they eventually become higher than the TPEO or from December 2020, and I can tell you substantially higher than where they are now. It also clarified that both the original QCSCA rates and those captured by the regulation, both of those TPEOs, if you like, have the same rates of pay. So what you're seeing here, I think, is a really good visual representation of what's happening with the award. This here is the modern award rate, and you can see it's got quite a substantial rate to go. So this is the ERO moving that modern award. You can see twice each year, one with the national minimum wage increase on the 1st of July each year, and one with the December ERO increase. So that moves at quite a high rate. You can see it's got to get all the way up here. The Queensland rates, however, start from a substantially higher base, and you can see they do move at a proportionate ERO amount. It's just that they don't move at the same rate. But thankfully, as we say, come December 2020, we'll all be sitting on the same rates of pay. So in terms of pay rates, Jobs Australia has provided to NDS, as you can see here, some pay tables that do show you the likely translation. And for Queensland, it's important to be clear and consistent about whether the ERO or the TPEO applies and which table for you to use. Some organisations have chosen to pay those TPEO rates as over-award rates, even though they technically didn't have to, and they should only be applying the equal remuneration or the federal award. And it may be because you got supplemented by the Queensland government, or you made a policy choice at the time to offer those above award rates. But you need to be clear about which one it is that you may have to maintain, then you can make some choices around that. So what we're seeing here is just an example of one of our pay tables. This is a community services worker. You can see here level 1, level 2, level 3. What we're setting out here is we set out for you exactly the casual loading, so the proportionate phased amount that needs to be paid to these people at any point in time. Again, what you're seeing here, translating over from the Queensland awards over to the modern SCADS awards and the applicable rates of pay. And again, there's that casual proportional phased amount. For those of you that don't have access to the Jobs Australia pay tables, you can access this information from the Fair Work Ombudsman's website. This is what it looks like. You simply log on here, you pick the Queensland SACS award if that's the one that was relevant to you. When you go in, it'll ask you to put in what someone used to be classified under. So here we've used the example of a community services worker level 3 pay point 1, which translated to a SCADS 3 pay point 1. And what it shows you is from the 1st of July last year, the rates that you had to apply. From the 1st of December, the rates that you had to apply. Now, just as an aside, if you're trying to translate from your old Queensland award to an unlikely translation, so if we were trying to do a level 3 down to a level 1, or a level 3 up to a SCADS level 8, the computer will actually tell you, the Ombudsman's website will actually tell you that this does not compute. If that does happen, you should check your translations to make sure that you're correct. If you're still convinced that yours are correct, you may need to work those out manually. So in terms of your industrial obligations and funding, the Commonwealth has given its commitment to fully funded share, including directly funded and jointly funded programs, and that's part of an 8-year phase-in to assist unfunded programs to be able to provide that funding, as well as to do with, obviously, government budgeting. The Commonwealth supplementation is based on a SACS level 4, and it's made up of 3 components. So the way that works is they calculate the equal remuneration increase for the applicable rate, so the rate at a level 4, and in this instance it was only a 7-month period for the ERO, given that it applied from December last year. So for a level 4, it was a 2.1% that is the ERO increase. Then they look at the proportion of funding program that's allocated to SACS wages, and that's what they say should be allocated to wages, not necessarily what you do. Then they multiply it by the grant amount of your organisation. So for example, what you're looking at here is a 2.1% equal remuneration order increase, multiplied by the 70% wages component, and then multiplied by the $1 million grant that our example organisation did get. So for the 7-month period, 2012-2013, that organisation will be looking at approximately $14,700 in supplementary funding. It's approximately $50,000 for the full year 2013-2014, but that again is depending on the national minimum wage increase on the 1st of July. So in terms of MI in scope, funding agencies are required to provide supplementation programs that are expected to employ SACS workers, but obviously there's no commitment to supplement where they're not industrially obliged to. So really it's about funding those that the ERO applies to, which is the SACS and process accommodation workers, and not any other types of workers. What you can do is have a look at if you've got people correctly covered under the correct award. There's a few awards that can cover employees within our industry, so the labour market assistants, aged care, nurses and health professionals. Obviously the test for determining the award in our industry is for in the social, community, home care and disability services. That's the correct award for us. The second test is to have a look at the classification definitions, and if there's a classification definition that can cover employees, then that's the award that we would put them under. If, for example, you have a bus driver, obviously our industry is the SCADS industry, but there's no classification descriptions that can cover a bus driver within that award. So you would need to go and find the correct applicable award for that employee. The second thing is, if SCADS does apply, you need to ensure that you've correctly classified people either into the home care or the SACS part of the award. As we said, there's no obligation to fund home care because they're not subject to the ERO, so you should make sure that you've got people correctly classified either under the SACS or the home care provisions of the modern award. In terms of industrial obligation and funding, if there's insufficient funding, unfortunately employees do have the industrial entitlement to be paid the correct legal minimum rates of pay, and you don't have the discretion to underpay due to lack of funding. We had a look earlier at some of your options, which is having a look at redoing the shifts to see if you can make some savings there, or potentially moving casuals over to permanent employees, thereby saving on that casual loading. Some other options are finding other revenue or absorbing by drawing on reserves. Obviously, some of the rather unfortunate things are reducing wages billed through attrition or restructure. And just to pause, if your organisation needs to go through restructure, you should definitely get that advice from your employer association. There are some very stringent rules in the Fair Work Act about how to take employees through a restructure. And remember, employees are employed by your organisation, not the funding body. I'd like to thank you all for listening today. Up on the screen now, you're seeing a resource page. Thank you very much. You can access either the Fair Work Ombudsman's website, Jobs Australia website, or certainly the NDS website for any further information. Thank you very much.